Brenda Carmichael, the self-appointed president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, stood on the pristine, freshly edged sidewalk, her arms crossed aggressively over her pastel cashmere sweater. She glared through designer sunglasses at the faded 1998 Ford F-150 parked quietly in the driveway. She only saw a black man in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, driving a vehicle that offended her delicate, upper-class sensibilities. We have property values to maintain, and quite frankly, you and this eyesore are a massive visual burden to this entire neighborhood. Before we continue, let us know in the comments which city or country you're watching from today. David stood in the driveway, the afternoon sun beating down on his broad shoulders, his face an impenetrable mask of calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step aggressively toward the furious woman on his property line. He just gently ran his thumb over the keys in his hand. David was a black single father who had just moved to the affluent suburb of Whispering Pines to give his 15-year-old daughter, Maya, a better environment and access to the top-tier high school. David was a retired chief litigator for the city's property and zoning division and currently a highly sought-after private consultant for commercial real estate giants. He didn't wear tailored suits on the weekends, and he absolutely refused to get rid of the old, faded blue Ford truck. The bobblehead nodded silently with every bump in the road. Every time David looked at that plastic figure, he remembered his father's favorite piece of advice. She had made the varsity track team, she was making friends, and the quiet safety of the suburb was exactly what she needed after the passing of her mother years ago. But Brenda's arrogance was a living, breathing cancer. She ruled, Whispering Pines like a suburban dictator, using the HOA bylaws to harass anyone who didn't fit her exact racial and socioeconomic mold. He was cited for his grass being a quarter-inch too long. She sent daily notices demanding it be hidden in the garage, despite the bylaws clearly stating residents could park registered vehicles in their own driveways. He wrote the checks in his neat, architect-like handwriting, refusing to give Brenda the explosive, angry reaction she so desperately wanted to capture on her phone. He suffered the humiliation silently, holding the faded baseball bobblehead in his hand at night, swallowing his pride to protect his daughter's peace. But Brenda, mistaking his profound discipline for weakness, was about to push the quiet giant past the point of no return. The harassment escalated from bureaucratic annoyance to direct, psychological warfare as the summer progressed. She instructed her teenage son to throw fast food wrappers onto David's lawn in the middle of the night, creating fake littering violations that she would promptly photograph and fine him for. He continued to smile at Maya, helping her with her AP history homework at the kitchen table, ensuring she never felt the heavy, toxic cloud hovering over their home. But the breaking point, the moment the quiet father decided that endurance was no longer an option, happened on a Tuesday afternoon during a torrential downpour. David was downtown in a closed-door deposition, his phone turned off when Brenda executed her most malicious move yet. Using her authority as HOA president, she bypassed the legal city channels and hired a shady, private predatory towing company owned by her brother-in-law. Claiming the Ford F-150 was an abandoned hazard, she had it forcibly dragged out of David's driveway. Panicked and believing the house had been robbed, Maya stood in the pouring rain for an hour, terrified, until David finally saw her frantic voicemails and rushed home. He found his daughter soaked to the bone, shivering violently on the porch, crying because she thought they were being evicted. He wrapped Maya in a warm blanket, made her hot tea, and kissed her forehead, promising her that everything was perfectly fine. The rain washed over his face as he stared at the deep tire tracks left by the tow truck. There was only the terrifying, arctic stillness of a man who had just mentally condemned his enemy to total destruction. He drove to the impound lot, paid the extortionate $800 release fee without a single argument, and got into his father's truck. He gently wiped a drop of water off the plastic baseball bobblehead on the dash. "All right, old man," David whispered to the empty cab. "Time to work." She constantly hosted lavish parties in her backyard, boasting about her brand-new $200,000 infinity pool and massive, multi-tiered concrete deck. It took him less than 20 minutes to find the fatal flaw. She had bribed a corrupt, low-level inspector to sign off on the permits, building her massive concrete pool and heavy deck directly over the city's primary high-pressure sewage and water mains. If those pipes ever needed maintenance, the city had the absolute, unquestionable legal right to access them, regardless of what was built on top. Brenda hadn't just broken a rule, she had placed a ticking time bomb under her own kingdom. The execution of David's plan was a masterpiece of bureaucratic violence, stripped of all emotion and driven purely by the unstoppable gears of municipal law. Over the next 4 weeks, David utilized his extensive network of honest city officials, engineers, and judges. He cited exact codes, subsections, and environmental hazard protocols. She was too busy planning her annual end-of-summer neighborhood block party, an event designed to solidify her status as the Queen of Whispering Pines. Brenda was holding court in a flowing silk sundress, standing at the edge of her sparkling infinity pool, loudly boasting about the Italian tile she had imported for the deck. The first sign that the world was about to end was the deep, rhythmic vibration in the ground. Brenda frowned, assuming it was a mix-up for a different neighborhood. The police officer stepped out, securing the perimeter. David walked calmly up her driveway, bypassing her entirely, and handed the heavy legal folder to the police captain, who then formally handed it to Brenda. "Brenda Carmichael," David said, his voice echoing loudly enough for every single one of her elite guests to hear. "You are being served with a state-level emergency municipal injunction. You illegally constructed a $200,000 pool and concrete deck directly over the primary municipal water and sewage mains, bypassing federal easement laws through fraudulent inspections. I have permits. This is private property. You can't just come in here." The city retains the absolute right to immediately excavate and remove any illegal encroachments blocking access to critical infrastructure. And seeing as the water pressure in this sector has dropped, the city has authorized an emergency visual inspection of the pipes under your yard. Proceed with the excavation. Tear it up. Her wealthy guests scrambled out of the way, gasping in shock as the machine reached the backyard. Brenda collapsed onto her knees in the mud, weeping hysterically, her silk dress ruined. 8 months later, the cul-de-sac at the end of Whispering Pines was quiet, but the landscape had drastically changed. Her backyard was a massive, gaping crater of dirt and exposed pipes. The city had not only demolished her pool, but they had slapped her with over $300,000 in fines for the illegal construction, environmental hazards, and the cost of the emergency excavation. The fraudulent inspector she had bribed had turned state's evidence to save himself, exposing Brenda's corruption to the entire community. The house was deep in foreclosure, and Brenda had been universally ousted from the HOA. He had officially taken the position as the head of the City Zoning Commission, a title that commanded immense respect. Maya had just won first place in the state track finals, and the neighbors now went out of their way to wave and smile respectfully whenever David drove by. It was a crisp Saturday morning. David was in his driveway, wearing his simple gray t-shirt, carefully waxing the hood of his father's faded blue Ford F-150. He heard the slow, shuffling footsteps before he saw her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap, oversized sweatshirt and generic jeans. She couldn't even look him in the eyes. She stared at his work boots. "I'm leaving today." She paused, swallowing hard, fighting back tears. David stood in the driveway, the polishing cloth in his hand. "The truck stays," David said softly, his voice perfectly calm and completely detached. He didn't look back at her. "And the lawsuit stays. I suggest you pack your box, Brenda. You're trespassing on my property." Brenda let out a quiet, shattered sob. He opened the door to his father's truck, got in, and turned the key. The old engine roared to life, a deep, powerful rumble that echoed through the quiet neighborhood.